For more than 2 decades on the bench, people often describe me the same way. Tough, direct, unshakable, the kind of judge who had no patience for excuses or wasted time. And honestly, most of that was true. I built my entire career on cutting through noise, saying what needed to be said, and refusing to let anyone turn my courtroom into a circus. I took pride in that reputation. I still do. But there was one morning, one ordinary Tuesday in April, that caught me completely off guard. A little girl walked into my courtroom holding her father's hand, looked straight at me, and quietly said 4 words that froze the entire room. My daddy cries every night. And for the first time in a very long while, I had absolutely nothing to say. I've carried that moment with me ever since. Because what happened that day wasn't really about parking tickets or courtroom procedure. It was about love, responsibility, survival, and the kind of quiet strength that most people never notice. Before television, before cameras and headlines, I spent 25 years serving on the family court bench in Manhattan. 25 years watching people at their absolute breaking point. Custody battles, broken homes, abuse cases, desperate parents, frightened children. Family court strips people down to who they really are. There's nowhere to hide in those rooms. People like to imagine courtrooms as cold, emotionless places. Some are. Mine wasn't. Fast-paced? Yes. Strict? Absolutely. I never tolerated nonsense. But cold? Never. I grew up in Queens. My father worked as a dentist, and my mother had the ability to silence a room with nothing more than a look. I inherited more from her than I realized at the time. I knew very early in life that I wanted to become a lawyer, then eventually a judge. Not because I cared about authority, but because I believed in the law. Truly believed in it. I believed it had the power to level the playing field between people who otherwise would never stand equal anywhere else. That belief stayed with me my entire life. And through all of it, my husband Jerry remained the steady presence beside me. Where I was impatient, he was calm. Where I reacted quickly, he slowed things down. He never tried to change me. Never asked me to soften who I was. That kind of support matters more than people realize. That Tuesday started like any other. My docket was full of small matters, traffic citations, minor disputes, parking violations. The sort of cases people dismiss as insignificant. I never dismissed them, because to the person standing in front of you, their case is never small. It's their life, their stress, their reality. I was moving through the morning calendar when one file caught my attention. Daniel Reyes, 3 unpaid parking tickets, same street every time. Always Tuesday and Thursday mornings, $45 each. With penalties added, it totaled $210. Nothing remarkable on paper, but patterns matter. And after years on the bench, I learned to trust my instincts when something didn't add up. When Mr. Reyes entered the courtroom, I immediately noticed how exhausted he looked. Early 30s, thin, worn down around the eyes. But his shirt had been carefully ironed. That told me something. People trying to hold on to dignity make an effort even when life is crushing them. Beside him stood a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old. Curly dark hair tied back with a yellow sunflower band. A white dress patterned with blue flowers. She clutched a stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest and looked around the courtroom with wide, fearless curiosity. I'd seen children in court many times before. But there was something different about her. It was the way she held her father's hand, not like a frightened child looking for protection, like someone trying to protect him. I noticed it instantly. I greeted Daniel, then looked down at the little girl. "And who is this?" I asked. His face softened immediately. "This is my daughter, Sophia." I said good morning to her, and she answered with complete seriousness, "Good morning, Judge." The entire courtroom warmed for a second. Even in a place filled with tension and frustration, that little voice changed the atmosphere. I opened the file again. 3 tickets, I said, same block, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Explain it to me. Daniel nodded politely. "Your Honor, that's the closest parking area near Sophia's therapy center. She attends speech therapy twice a week. The sessions last nearly 3 hours, but parking there only allows 1 hour. I can't leave in the middle of her treatment, and I can't afford garage parking every time." I asked if he stayed nearby during the appointments. "Yes, Your Honor, I wait outside." "And what do you do for work?" There was a pause before he answered. "I worked as a line cook. The restaurant shut down a few months ago. Since then, I've been taking grocery delivery shifts whenever I can get them." Then he quietly added, "I'm trying, not dramatically, Not for sympathy, just the honest words of a man running on empty. I recognized that look immediately. I'd seen it thousands of times over the years. People carrying far more than they let others see. Then Sophia tugged gently at his sleeve. She looked up at him first, then turned directly toward me and said, without hesitation, "My daddy cries every night. Now understand something about me. I am not easily emotional in court. I've spent decades making hard decisions. I've heard every sad story imaginable. People have called me ruthless more times than I can count. But those 4 words hit me harder than I expected. I removed my glasses and pressed my fingers briefly against my eyes. Because children tell the truth differently than adults do. They don't calculate, they don't manipulate. They simply say what they see. And what Sophia saw was her father struggling in silence. Daniel looked completely shattered in that moment. Not embarrassed for himself, but heartbroken that his daughter had noticed his pain. He softly brushed her hair back and whispered, "It's okay, sweetheart." I cleared my throat and looked back at him. "You're carrying a lot right now, Mr. Reyes." He straightened slightly and answered, "Yes, Your Honor. But we're going to be okay." And somehow I believed him immediately, not because life was being kind to him, because he struck me as the kind of man who refuses to quit no matter how difficult things become. The carefully ironed shirt told me that. The therapy appointments told me that. The fact that he kept showing up every Tuesday and Thursday told me that. I looked again at the amount owed. $210. To some people, that's nothing. To someone fighting to survive gig job to gig job while raising a child alone, it's enormous. It's groceries. Utility shows for a growing child. My father always believed the law should serve people, not punish them blindly. I carried that lesson with me every day I sat on the bench. I finally looked at Daniel and said, "I've been doing this long enough to recognize when someone is trying their best. And what I see is a father doing everything he possibly can in a very difficult situation." His eyes filled slightly, though he tried hard not to show it. Then I dismissed every ticket. All of them, the entire courtroom, seemed to exhale at once. Daniel stood there speechless for several seconds before finally saying, "I don't know how to thank you," I told him. "Go home and take care of your daughter. That's enough." Sophia immediately looked up at him and asked, "Daddy, is it good?" For the first time since he entered the room, Daniel laughed. A genuine laugh. Kind that comes from relief finally breaking through fear. He picked her up and held her tightly. "Yes, baby, it's good." She touched his face gently and smiled. I knew it. I lowered my head toward my paperwork because I needed a moment to compose myself. My clerk silently slid a tissue closer to me. After so many years working together, she understood without words. I watched them leave the courtroom together. Sophia sitting on his hip, her stuffed rabbit bouncing as they walked away. And all afternoon I kept hearing those 4 words in my mind. "My daddy cries every night." Later that same day, another woman appeared in court. Her name was Angela Moretti, and according to my clerk's note, she wanted to explain something unrelated to her own citation. The moment she stepped forward, she told me she was Daniel Reyes's sister. She explained that she'd been in court earlier that morning with Sophia and had witnessed everything. Then she told me the rest of the story. Daniel had been raising Sophia alone since she was barely over a year old. After Sophia's speech delay diagnosis, her mother left and never returned. Since then, Daniel had handled everything himself, every therapy appointment, every bedtime story, every late-night worry. Angela explained that her brother never complained to anyone. He simply kept going. But Sophia could hear him crying at night when he thought she was asleep. She looked at me and said quietly, "I just needed someone else to see who he really is." I listened carefully, then dismissed her ticket too. Before she left, I told her, "Your brother is not invisible." She cried when I said it. And after she walked out, I sat quietly for several minutes thinking about how many people live like Daniel. Good people carrying impossible weight without recognition. Parents sacrificing everything for their children while the world barely notices. 3 days later, my clerk knocked on my office door. "Mr. Reyes and Sophia are here to see you." When they entered, Daniel looked different. Still tired but lighter somehow. Sophia walked in beside him, with the same sunflower hair tie and stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. Daniel thanked me for listening to him, not just ruling fairly listening. Then he admitted something quietly. after leaving court that Tuesday. He sat in his car thinking about Sophia's words. He realized she'd been hearing his pain all along. "I thought I hid it better," he said softly. Then he told me he wanted to do better for her. I told him something I still believe deeply. The fact that she held your hand like she wanted to protect you doesn't mean you failed her. It means she loves you completely. That stayed with him. I could see it. Then Sophia leaned across my desk and offered me her stuffed rabbit. "You can hold him," she said proudly. "He's nice. I've received awards, recognition, television success. But nothing touched me the way that little girl sharing the most important thing she owned touched me in that moment." I asked the rabbit's name. "Mr. Flop," she answered seriously. I told her Mr. Flop seemed like excellent company. She nodded in approval before taking him back and tucking him under her arm again. Before leaving, Daniel shook my hand firmly and thanked me again. I reminded him to care for himself too, not just Sophia. And I meant it. A few weeks later, I heard he'd gotten hired at a newly reopened restaurant downtown. Full-time work, benefits, a schedule that allowed him to keep taking Sophia to therapy. That news stayed with me for days, because sometimes a small decision changes everything. $210 could have pushed that man into losing his license, losing transportation, missing therapy appointments for his daughter. That's how fragile life can become for people hanging on by a thread. Every case matters because every person matters. Months later, I saw them again at a community event. Sophia had improved tremendously. She was talking more confidently, more clearly. Her therapy was working. She ran straight toward me and proudly announced, "Judge." I crouched down and told her how wonderful she looked. "I know," she answered confidently, making me laugh harder than I had in a long time. Daniel looked healthier too, rested, hopeful. He told me Sophia's therapist had recently described her progress as remarkable. I smiled and told him she was a remarkable child. Then I added she must get that from somewhere. He lowered his eyes and quietly replied, "I'm trying to deserve that." I told him he already did more than he realized. As I watched them disappear into the crowd together, Sophia talking excitedly while Daniel listened with complete attention, I thought again about what this work truly meant. Not fame, not television, the real work, seeing people fully, understanding the humanity behind every case file. Over the years, people often questioned whether I was too tough, too blunt, too strict. Here's what I know now. Compassion and strength are not opposites. The law needs structure. It needs firmness. I believe that every single day I wore those robes. But without heart, justice becomes empty. Sometimes justice is simply recognizing someone's struggle and refusing to let them carry it alone. That Tuesday morning reminded me of that, and I have never forgotten it. I still believe what I believed when I first became a judge. The law belongs to everyone. Every person who walks into a courtroom deserves dignity, deserves fairness, deserves to be seen as a human being before anything else. That is what makes this work matter, and it always will.